Protection Commission meeting for November 16th, 2017. Brian, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? The flag is over here.
Get the screen, I guess. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I guess I should ask, Ashley, do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Please call the roll.
Chair Thompson,
Here.
Commissioner Natoli, Commissioner Banales,
Here.
Commissioner Biaggi,
Here.
Commissioner Ferguson,
Here.
Commissioner Bush,
Here.
Commissioner Slater,
Here.
Commissioner White,
Here.
Commissioner Eddy,
Here.
Commissioner Chernell.
Here.
Okay, thank you all. Moving on to consent agenda, item 4. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes of September 21, 2017?
I move.
Motion by Kate White,
Second.
second by Brian Bush.
Bush.
Okay, Bush. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous, thank you. Item 5, approving the 2018 commission meeting dates. Eric, did you want to?
Just a quick word about this. The proposed meeting dates for 2018 would track with the commission's meeting schedule this year, so the third Thursday of odd-numbered months, and we attempt to move it around the Delta, so you'll see proposed meeting locations. We're pretty sure we can stick to the locations, but the most important thing is to commit to the dates, and so we ask the commission to approve those dates. 6 regular commission meetings and then 6 alternate meetings, again on the third Thursday of even-numbered months in case we need to use those for a commission meeting.
Okay,
We haven't had to do that this year. We did one time in 2016.
okay, thank you. Any discussion on this item? Is there a motion?
I'll move to.
Motion by Bush,
I'll second.
second by
Eddie.
Eddie. All in favor by indicating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, Eric, item 6.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, commission members. Just a few items I'd like to highlight from the executive director report that's in the commission packet. Our Delta Flood Safety Fair was held on October 21st, this year in Walnut Grove at the Walnut Grove Library. A good, successful effort this year. More exhibitors, more attendees, more importantly, and good exchange of information about flood preparedness and flood safety in the Delta. And especially was grateful for our partnership with the River Delta School District, and we were able to send information about the Flood Safety Fair and flood preparedness coloring book home with students, and that helped our attendance for certain. Special thanks to Stacy Hayden of our staff. She was the mastermind behind this effort. It was her first year with it, and she really took it to a new level for us this year. I'm real appreciative of that. Delta Leadership Program 2018. This is an effort that the Commission has partnered with the Delta Regional Foundation over the last couple of years. We're gearing up for the 2018 Delta Leadership Program. It's a 5-month program. It starts in January. It concludes in May. There's one seminar per month. It's a day-long seminar that we put our participants through. Morning focus on policy issues of particular relevance to the Delta, such as agriculture, water, recreation, public safety. And the afternoon is a focus on skills development. The call for nominations is out currently. The deadline is December 7th. As we did last year, I would propose, Mr. Chair, that I work with you, if you're willing, and another member of the commission to review the applications and to make the selection for the leadership program. I think we'd probably have a participant from the Delta Regional Foundation joining that as well. It's not been a heavily oversubscribed program. I don't think it'll be a big challenge to do that, but we are always hoping for more applicants so that we can really get the most committed people participating. Yes.
Let me just stop you right there, Eric. Is there anyone that would like to serve on that subcommittee to review the applications? Last year it was myself and Villegas. Wasn't it Commissioner Villegas?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Anyone want to serve on that? I would. Chris? Okay.
It'll be a pretty minimal commitment of time.
Okay, so myself and Chris will serve on it.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you.
You're welcome.
And most importantly, there's a copy of the application packet in front of all of you. Please bring us applicants. You know, think of people who could benefit from this type of effort. We've had commission members participating in the program. Commissioner Van Lobensel's and Commissioner Wynn were both participants the first year. We've had ample participation from our advisory committee. I think about 4 of our advisory committee members have participated in the program. It's just been a really great effort. It's a superb joint effort with the Delta Regional Foundation, and we need good people from all throughout the Delta region. So take a look at that, think of who might be a good applicant, and encourage people to participate. And then ride herd on them a little bit. People need a little extra encouragement to get something like this done. The application shouldn't take more than an hour unless you really want to put a big effort into it. So it's been light on the land use front in terms of commission land use comment letters, but you can see the sole entry there. A few items on the administrative update before I conclude. One is that we did give a send-off to our senior planner, Adele Lagomarsino, at the end of October. She's retiring. Can't believe she did that on us, but she's had a long, good career with the state, and we were really pleased to have her for the last several years of her state service at the commission. She did a fantastic job for us on recreation and Delta Trail and other related measures. We're recruiting for that position. I don't have anything to report at this point, but I hope by the time the commission meets in January, we'll be able to report that new staff member. And I thought I'd be able to report our new project manager, our new program manager today that was a result of this year's budget, the augmentation we got to upgrade one of our positions. We're not quite finalized with that yet. I expect we will be within the next week, and then that person will be well on staff by the time the commission meets again in January. So that's it for the commission staffing update. And I also wanted to mention that if your commission staff is looking a little bit frazzled today, especially our clerk, Ashley Medina, and Assistant Executive Director Natasha Nelson, it's because we are moving our suite, fortunately just across the hall in our building. And today was kind of the start of the move day. We thought we'd make it challenging for us by scheduling it when we had a commission meeting. And it will continue tomorrow, and there will be additional work over the weekend. But so far it's been great. It's a fantastic new suite. And do we have a tentative date, Natasha, for the open house? Or are we ready to announce that?
No, MBK is the date I like for their party.
Oh, yeah, we don't want to compete with the MBK party. They have better food than we'll have. So anyway, we will have, whether it occurs in December, which is kind of a busy month, or perhaps in January, we'll have some type of open house, and we'll put the notice out to commission members and others out there that follow our work. But we expect to be fully functional in our new suite by Tuesday at the latest. And aside from some upcoming events in my executive director report, that pretty much is what I wanted to highlight, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions, Eric, his report? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 7. We're going to receive a update report from the chair of the Delta Protection Advisory Committee, Mark Pruner. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. No, this is not my report. This is where I go next. It's the last public workshop for the Delta Conservation Framework. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read some of the materials. This is part of a plan being put together by the Department of Fish and Wildlife that will extend out to 2050 and govern, at least in a macro sense, virtually every conservation effort that happens in the Delta. Everybody's parcel, everybody's community will in one way or another, I think, be affected by this framework and this plan. So I know some of you have weighed in on it, and again, this is the last public workshop. The public comment period closes tomorrow. So
Actually,
I
Mark,
encourage you to.
let me just stop you there. We were granted an extension to that, so it's.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I asked yesterday, some of my colleagues and my staff in particular asked if it could be extended, and Carl Wilcox agreed to extend it, I think, until the middle of.
It's December 8th now,
8th? Is
Mr.
it
Chair.
8th?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we sent out a notice to our list yesterday, and others did too, so Mark's behind on his
I'm-
email.
I'm
but-
behind in my emails.
Okay.
Apparently. Anyway, so if you, I'm just going to then renew my request to weigh in. I think some of the areas in terms of governance, the maps, and some of the outlying features and how they intend to accomplish conservation really need to be fleshed out. So through the public comment process, I think is a tremendous way to do that. At our last meeting, I'll just set this here. We decided, listening to a comment made some time ago by Commissioner Villegas, to get a broader spectrum of input to what we do and the work that we perform in advising the commission. So for the first time, we went on the road, so to speak. We've been having our meetings in Walnut Grove. This time we went out to Discovery Bay. And it was a little bit, quite a bit of an experiment. It's the first time we kind of gotten out of the Walnut Grove groove, as it were. But I'm glad to say that we had near unanimous committee attendance. We saw a number of people from the community in Discovery Bay that had never been, to my knowledge, to a Delta Protection Advisory Committee meeting or participated otherwise. And so we accomplished our goal to get out, to give the commission, I think, a broader perspective, to gather input from more sources than we had in the past and get ourselves on the road. So I think we accomplished all of those goals and it worked out well. You never know when you try an experiment unless you try it and see what happens. So I think we're gonna do this again. If any of the commission members have suggestions on where to convene our next meeting, we'd love to hear that. Of course, we love our resource agency member. Maybe you could arrange a meeting in the governor's office. That would be optimal. But we'll keep shooting for that.
Chris will get right on that.
We will get right on that. I've talked to his predecessor a few times and made a similar request.
I'm glad to hear that you went to Discovery Bay.
Yes.
Because when the Delta Stewardship held their CSO amendment meeting down there were probably 300 in the audience. They're engaged. They want to know what's happening. So I commend you for having a meeting down there. I hope it was a lively meeting.
It was. We learned that we could do better in public outreach and get the news out, but we had key folks there. And most importantly, we received a report and had frank discussion on the Delta Conservation Framework from the actual proponents in the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we were able to bring decision makers to the community and give them a way to have input into the process other than just talking with us. We've decided, at least tentatively, to forego our December meeting. Typically, we like to meet in even-numbered months to give us time to kind of ramp up from what occurs at commission meetings, engage in our long-term projects, and then look forward to what the commission intends to plan to accomplish in its upcoming few months or so. But Christmas being Christmas, we decided, unless something comes up, take the month of December off, and we tentatively plan to meet again in February at a location not yet decided, which loops me back to governor's office or any other place that you might have comments or input on. We'd love to go. And we look forward to a great year coming up. So we don't have any input at this point to agenda items in front of the commission, other than that what we provided staff input on a variety of subjects. And I want to thank Erik in particular for honoring our request to update us on all the staff projects. Again, we were just overwhelmed at what the staff is doing, both in terms of the number of projects and areas that are moving forward, as well as the depth of engagement and the expertise that's brought to bear on your behalf. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'd be
Any
glad to
questions for
answer
Mark?
those.
I just want to say thanks, Mark, for all the hard work you're doing in the Delta, and keep us on our toes.
Yes,
Let
sir.
us know.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much. Thank you all.
Moving on to item 8, we're going to receive a presentation from the Delta Watermaster, Michael George. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission. I'm pleased to be here. I want to start by actually thanking Mark. He has also been very good and gracious about engaging a lot of the bureaucrats in Sacramento around Delta issues and pulling us out of Sacramento to come and meet in the Delta. And I've been honored to be invited to a couple of those events. And I think it's an extremely useful thing to create venues where you can have informal conversations with the people who live, work, and love the Delta. So I want to thank him for that. So this is my usual just update on activities. So I want to give you a sense for the things I'd like to cover, which is an update on a study that your commission has been a partner on, which is about to come to fruition. I want to talk about not only where we are, but where we think that process is going to go. Secondly, I want to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on at the state board. Obviously, you know that there's a lot going on, so we can maybe put that in some context. Talk about similarly what's going on in the Stewardship Council. Your chairman obviously is there as an active member of the council, and participated earlier this week in the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting, where he did get the extension of time to comment on the framework. So I think that's a good thing to get more input from the Delta. We're also about to be in the first month of activity under the WIN Act, the federal act that is going to change some of the project operations in the Delta. So I want to give you a little update on that, and then further update on what we're doing to consolidate lessons that we think we've learned from the drought and that we may be able to apply the next time we have water shortage. So starting with the first of those, the consumptive use study, and just to remind you, this is a study in which the commission has participated financially, and also Erik's been involved in reviewing drafts and some of the study developments. It is a study of different methods for estimating consumptive use in the Delta, and understanding and being able to measure in close to real time the use of water in the Delta is important for a lot of different things. On the regulatory side, it's a critical part of the Delta Island consumptive use, which is part of the regulatory structure under D 1641 that governs the activities of the export projects. But it's also important to understand what's happening in the Delta in terms of water use. So as we're winding down this 2-year study, we had a workshop, brought all 7 of the different research teams together at UC Davis on October 16th. We agreed on a lot of issues with respect to the finalization of this 2-year study and sent it to the peer review team. We actually invited the peer review team to come to that workshop on the 16th, and the report now with technical appendices A through J, so a lot of very kind of dense technical scientific information for those who care about getting way down into the details. But we've also got about a 50-page report undergoing peer review now that'll be published in a peer review journal probably in January. So the study over the last 2 years is about to be finished. So it's important, I think, to talk about what comes next. So first of all, the study that we've done is the consumptive use of crops in the Delta, and to focus on what makes it different, why you can't just use an overall number. For instance, corn is 3 acre-feet per acre per year. We've gotten into much more detail and into much more like real time instead of just on an annual basis what the water use is. But we've recognized that we need to understand better the consumptive use of water on fallowed land, because a lot of the fallowed land, a lot of land in the Delta is below sea level and has a significant consumptive use, even if there's no crop on it. So in 2018, we've organized a study to look specifically at the consumptive use of water on fallowed land. So we've got about 2,000 to 4,000 acres of land volunteered by Delta farmers to set up a comparison between a well-managed fallow parcel next to a similarly well-managed agricultural crop, so that we can look at different elevations in the Delta, different areas in the Delta, and understand that consumptive use of fallowed land. It's also clear from the study that a much larger amount of water than at least I, and I think a lot of other people understood, is consumed in the Delta through evaporation from open water, from evaporation from riparian vegetation, not crops, and from invasive weeds and species. For instance, it appears that the consumptive use of hyacinth is 4 to 6 times the amount of evaporation from open water. So I think that's the next study that we're going to try and figure out, so that we have a better sense for that, call it passive use of water in the Delta. That's going to be important, Chris, as some of the work that you're working on, where we're doing some of this restoration, and we need to have a better understanding for the freshwater demands of that change in land use. So those are things that we're going to be getting at next. It's also important to take the science out of those appendices and make it useful to real people in real time in the Delta, whether it's farmers, regulators, project operators, reclamation districts. And so one of the things that we are also working on is a project called OpenET, which has just been funded by a number of agencies, but mostly with foundation funding, to get that information out, get it onto your cell phone so that you can know what ET is on a daily or even more short time basis. And that'll be, we think, extremely helpful in terms of management of Delta water use and system water use as we go forward. And I think the other thing that is possible here, and we're involved in other research to figure out whether a better sense for evapotranspiration in the Delta will allow us to leapfrog the need to measure every diversion. We've become very aware of the fact that measuring consumptive use, measuring diversions in the Delta as required by SB 88, turns out to be more complicated, frankly, than understood. It's more expensive, and it may not give us the kind of real-time data that measuring ET would give us. So hopefully this study that we're just concluding, and will go into the peer-reviewed journal, will help us figure out a way to leapfrog that diversion measurement. Unless there are questions, I'm going to go on.
Michael.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned hyacinth. There was several projects on eradication. We haven't heard much about them. Maybe there's better flow, temperatures are down. What's the status on these projects?
So you're right. We've heard less about it because of a lot of factors, some environmental factors, also some management factors. We got better regulatory response. We got better boating and water works response. The process of managing hyacinth improved fairly dramatically this year. It started earlier. It went to the places where the hyacinths get started, so forth. So it is better. It was less of a problem this year. However, one of the things that we believe is that understanding the ET of hyacinth should actually draw more money to managing it. And so one of the things that I would hope will come out of this third step in this consumptive use process is a better understanding of the water cost and therefore the value of managing hyacinth more aggressively.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir. Michael, quick question, because you referred to this study over 2 years, consumptive use. I'm assuming you had measuring devices on the diversion. Is also part of the study you had measuring devices on the return?
So, Bob, it wasn't so much measuring devices. These 7 different strategies for measuring ET are primarily computer analysis of satellite images or unmanned vehicle images. Now, on the other hand, you're quite right in focusing on the fact that as you look at ET, that's what I like to call one of the 4 legs of the stool of understanding water in the Delta. One is what's being diverted onto the island. One is what's being consumed on the island. That's the ET that we've been studying. One is return flows, what gets pumped back off the island. And then the fourth and the toughest variable to understand is what seeps in and seeps out. You may have seen an announcement by the PPIC, the Public Policy, I forget. They just came out with some studies this week, including what I think is a very interesting study of how water is allocated and how it's been allocated. There's a very interesting description of water allocation over a period from like 1980 through 2016. And the thing that struck me as I looked at that is how little and how steady water use in the Delta is. It's a relatively small amount, and wet years, dry years, it's very hard to make it vary. I think that's an interesting finding. It requires, it proposes, it suggests further analysis of some of those issues, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
So I'll go quickly through the State Water Board. You're aware that phase 2 of the WaterFix proceedings, the phase on environmental impacts, is about to start in January. There are a series of procedural rulings that have been made and a whole schedule of hearing dates that go out through July. So that's about to heat up again beginning in early January. In my view, more important than that, because it seems clear to me that WaterFix is undergoing some pretty significant, shall I say, re-engineering in light of the financial realities that came to light with recent votes by Westlands and I think in many ways more importantly by Santa Clara Valley Water District. It's clear that there's re-engineering that's needed because of the financial impacts of that. But I think more important than that is probably phase 2 of the water quality control plan update. This phase 2, just as phase 1 focused on the San Joaquin River, phase 2 focuses on the Sacramento River, the east side tributaries, and importantly to this group, to water use in the Delta. So the preliminary documents were released in October. The comment period ended last week. Staff's now going through those comments, and we anticipate that in light of those comments, staff will update some of the documents that have been released and use that input to develop a substitute environmental document, which will be a staff recommendation with engineering and scientific support for managing primarily flows, but also influencing other environmental stressors in the Delta. So we think that substitute environmental document is probably going to be out early in 2018. And what I would say is that in terms of my review of those documents, the big issue that is not fully addressed there, because it's in one sense premature, is how to implement whatever the standards are going to be. So the documents that we see today talk about what the water quality objectives are, how the state board anticipates framing its balancing of various water uses throughout the Delta watershed. But it's light on, and I don't mean that as a criticism, I mean it doesn't tell the story of how those objectives are going to be implemented. And I say that that's an important thing to pay attention to as we go forward. I will also say that there have been very important personnel changes at the state board, which are likely to make significant changes in how the state board operates going forward. So I think the last time we were here, Joaquin Esquivel was new to the board, had replaced Fran Spivey Weber. He's made significant contributions, but more recently than that, Tom Howard, the longtime executive director, is retired, and he's now been replaced by Eileen Sobek, who started the Monday after the Labor Day holiday. In addition, the Division of Water Rights has had a change based on retirements. So Erik Ekdahl is the new deputy director. He takes that position on Monday, replaces the outgoing Les Grover. And just today, the new deputy director announced his replacement for the enforcement division. So his deputy in the enforcement division is a woman named Judy Lozado. I just met her for the first time this evening after it was announced. But those are very important positions at the state board, and they are emblematic of the fact that there are a lot of retirements going on in the state board. We're going to see some significant changes among staff at senior levels. So I think there are some opportunities and some need to rethink some of the things that have been done and some of the strategies for going forward. George.
Who replaces, I mean, how's the mechanics of that work? I mean, does the governor just wave a wand and that's it?
Well, this isn't even the governor, George. It's, these are staff changes. So the state board, the 5 members of the state board appointed Eileen Sobek, but then she, as executive director, essentially makes the other personnel decisions. So I was on the interview panel for Les Grover's replacement as director of the Division of Water Rights, but it was an interview panel, and ultimately Erik Ekdahl was selected. And then he selected his deputy, Julie, who's, as I say, was just announced today, and takes her role as of December 1st.
Does that promote like the same mindset from the people that are replaced? So you get new faces, but same ideas, same thought process, same end game. Is that a good characterization or not?
No, I think these are very different mindsets. Certainly in Eileen Sobek, very different background, very different approach than Tom Howard. Tom was a long time in the state board. He had deep background. He had a lot of credibility with staff, an enormous amount of loyalty, but a long time in the process. And Eileen comes to us after a long career. She's a lawyer. She was in Washington for most of her career. She was a solicitor. She was in the Justice Department, then a solicitor for the Department of Interior, and most recently a senior policymaker at the National Fish and Wildlife Service. So very different than Tom's background, different approach, comes freshly to California government. She's a native of Davis, but I would say a very significant change from the administration that preceded her. Similarly, I think Erik Ekdahl is a pretty dramatic change in the Division of Water Rights. So I think these are important changes. It's not just moving people up who were kind of the understudies and had the same point of view.
Michael, Chris, you?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Quick question, given that the consumptive use study deals, at least in part, with water use, is there going to be a functional, or do you see a functional relationship between that study and the water quality control plan update that you just discussed?
Absolutely. And what's going to be published in this study is going to be incredibly important to inform how to implement the water quality control plan. And for instance, Chris, you're going to see some of these same tools are going to end up being deployed for Sustainable Groundwater Management Act purposes. For instance, if you've got a sustainable groundwater plan and you say, we're going to use this much water from the surface, which is going to be measured under SB 88, and we know from satellite imaging, for instance, what the consumptive use of the crop is, that'll help close the balance in terms of knowing that the rest of it comes from groundwater use. So yes, you're going to see this model develop and be used not only by the Office of the Delta Watermaster, but by the SIGMA administration as well as the Division of Water Rights.
Michael, do you see any, this might be a little off track, any thoughts to the naysayers that say they're going to try to still get removed the people in the Delta from the SIGMA Act because of the groundwater, the argument that they've been saying? Isn't that strictly a legislative deal that?
Yes, I think it'll be a while to figure out how SIGMA works before there are significant changes to the law.
My point was that what you've developed with your research in the evapotranspiration and so forth, consumptive use, can that affect that argument?
Absolutely. In fact, I think many of you will want to get into the details of some of these appendices, but when this study is released, I've done my level best to make sure that the scientists write this in a way that a non-scientist can practically use it. So I think it is going to be a readable, understandable document that will have important policy implications, but it'll also help to inform farming practices in the Delta. Okay. Eric's going to give me the hook here if I don't speed this up. So the Delta Stewardship Council, I'll give you some updates here. Obviously, Skip's on the council and provides a lot of this insight. So you know that the Delta Plan has proposed some significant updates from original in 2013, the Delta Levy Investment Strategy, conveyance and storage and operation of both, and those amendments which have been adopted are now the subject of CEQA analysis. So watch this space because the Delta Plan is designed as the primary overarching planning document for activities in the Delta. In addition, the council has worked hard on this revised science action agenda. I think it extends the impact of the One Delta, One Science. We've got a new lead scientist. Cliff Dahm is retired. John Calloway, who comes to the lead scientist position from the University of San Francisco with a lot of, frankly, a lot more knowledge and understanding of what we're now calling the lower estuary, which we used to call the San Francisco Bay Area. What they used to call the Delta, they're now calling the upper estuary. And it's really part of this notion of recognizing that there's an entire ecosystem that goes from the headwaters to the interface with the Pacific Ocean, and that understanding it and recognizing it as a whole ecosystem rather than a series of regulatory opportunities under Endangered Species Act. I think that's gaining some traction. And where the traction is most apparent to me is at the so-called DPIC, the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, where most recently on Monday, but every 6 months, a group comes together that represents about 17 different agencies. And I think, Skip, you'd agree that one of the things that happens there is that agency heads kind of hold each other responsible. Or they say, we need this to go forward, and they kind of look to each other and say, is your agency in or out? And so there's some pressure, and I can tell you as staff to our chair, Felicia Marcus, preparation for that DPIC meeting is an important aspect, because she wants to go there and say what we've accomplished that we said we'd do 6 months ago. And everybody within the organization now is very well aware that there's kind of a report card due every 6 months. And that is an important part of making sure that we don't just all stay in our silos, and there is a commitment to actually getting stuff done under this plan. So again, unless there are questions, I'm going to move on here to implementation of the WIN Act. This is really complicated. And the federal agencies have been wrapping themselves around the axle to try and figure out how to actually implement this law. Right now, I would say the biggest impact that we're staring at is the WIN Act's requirement to capture as much of the flood flows or winter storm flows as possible. So what they are trying to do now, and this is real-time implementation, they're trying to figure out how long ahead of a storm event they can reliably predict it, so that they can then enter into a process of very quickly doing a whole bunch of analysis and decision-making that they're used to taking months to do, and they're now got to do in a period of time between when they have a reliable storm estimate and when the storm actually comes in. So they're proposing a series of very rapid steps and trying to set up protocols so that they can be done quickly, so that within a 5 or 6 day prediction window, they can make decisions about the extent of the storm, the likely hydrology, where the smelt are, what's going on, the life cycle for the salmonids, and figure out how much of the crest of the flows they can capture. It's an incredibly detailed process under a statute that has a lot of ambiguity in it. And this is going to be a real-time drama to figure out how it's actually going to work. And of course, there are changes in personnel throughout the federal agencies. Honestly, my sense is that most of those changes are pretty positive in the sense of more responsive to what's going on in California. The complaint that I'd had, and I think others had, was the difficulty of getting attention from the feds way out here in the West. I think that is changing, and I think we're getting more attention and more decision-making. And one of the aspects of that is this structured decision-making process where the Bureau of Reclamation has basically said, we've got to make a series of decisions about how we're going to use scarce resources to affect our activities and actions in the Delta. And instead of doing it the way we used to do it, which was essentially on a budgeting basis that was pretty opaque, we're going to use this structured decision-making process. We're going to bring other people in to help inform us, and we're going to do it on a more objective and more transparent basis. I think that's got some real promise because it gives people with points of view about how the project operates to actually weigh in and have their point of view, their needs, their worries and concerns taken into account. The Bureau still retains the right to make the ultimate decision. But watch this space. Depending on how the weather turns out, it could have significant impacts, more so probably on the southern Delta and on operation of the cross-channel gates, but it could be a wild ride depending on hydrology this year. So the final thing I want to leave you with is what we're doing to try and consolidate and apply lessons that we learned during the drought. So we're working closely with the Division of Water Rights to produce a drought retrospective. What did we do in the 2012 through 2016 time period? What did we learn from it? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How did we come to conclusions that we came to? What were the models that we used? What can we do to improve them? One of the most important parts of that analysis is to use the information that we got. The overall sense in the last drought was that the whole state, water managers, farmers, regulators, whether at the state board, whether at the Department of Water Sources, was that we were information and insight and data poor. So the legislature's given us a good deal of new authority, but one of the most important things was that in 2015, everybody in the Delta, the larger diverters, with pre-14 and riparian rights, reported on the basis for those rights, and we've done an analysis and a review of all that information that you all sent in response to that information order. In the short term, we used your predictions of what was going to be used on a monthly basis to help inform our management during the Delta. But the longer term impact is going to be, what are the water rights, what's the evidence for them, and what's the hierarchy so that we can inform people better, be more transparent about what we will do in the next drought so that you can plan better. It's very clear to everybody that we got through the last drought primarily because of good planning and well-designed responses by water managers. It wasn't because of regulatory direction. So one of the things that we think we need to do is give better information and insight on which people can make their plans and have some understanding of how the board will respond. So we're trying to do that. We've got a target date of December 4th, Monday a week from I guess 2 weeks, to publish a big spreadsheet that we've developed that kind of summarizes our preliminary conclusions. The idea here is to get it out, say, this is what you told us, this is our analysis of it, tell us what we got wrong, tell us what we're missing. If there's more information that's come to light or more analysis that you've done since 2015, when you had to put all this together in a very short time frame, now's the time to come forward with it. and we're going to try and get that kind of crowd correction and augmentation. But in that process, we also identified some common challenges, one being how to untangle riparian and pre-14 water rights. They're separate water rights, but very often in the Delta, they're intertwined and entangled, and in fact, there was kind of a boilerplate response by lawyers who said, we think that our riparian and pre-14 rights overlap and intertwine such that they can't be separated. So one of the things that we've been working on is trying to figure out to what extent we can get a better handle on how to evaluate those different water rights. So watch this space. We'll be publishing some materials on that, asking for input from the water barn, from water users in the Delta. And the overall objective here is to be more transparent, to be predictable, so that we can take advantage of what, by saying what we think we learned, we think we can get more learning from the water users in the Delta, and that's really what we're looking for. So that we know we're going to have more severe droughts. We know we're having to deal with changes wrought by climate change, and we're trying to see if we can take the experience that we had in 2012 through 2016 and learn from it and apply it in ways that make us better able to manage when those droughts recur in the future. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my report. I'm happy to take questions, but I'm also happy to get the hook from Erik.
All right, Michael. Are there any questions of Michael? Seeing none, thank you for the report and the update.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to our next item. Erik's going to update us on California WaterFix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The staff report in the commission packet was an attempt to summarize, and a very, very brief summary, I might add, a host of recent actions related to California WaterFix. First off, I want to give a special thanks to both Blake Roberts, who prepared the staff report, but also to Melinda Terry, a member of our Delta Protection Advisory Committee and manager of North Delta Water Agency. She did some research on this and had presented a very finely detailed email with a lot of hyperlinks in it that was very helpful in pulling together this report. This might be repetitive for many commission members, and so I'll try to be very brief and not go over every one of these actions, but suffice it to say there's been a lot of activity recently on the California WaterFix project, and most of the activity, which has been well documented in news reports, has been around the actions taken by water contractor agencies over the last couple of months regarding their commitment or lack of commitment, as the case may be, to participate in California WaterFix, specifically votes by Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and Kern County Water Agency are on one end of the spectrum, where they voted to support Cal WaterFix and to, well, I don't know if you can exactly say they voted to commit their funding, but they've made every indication that they are committed to the project. As the staff report indicates, there have yet to be binding financial agreements committing districts to pay for the project, but presumably those would follow these initial votes by these entities. And then votes by Westlands Water District and Santa Clara Water District at the other end of the spectrum, or at least along the spectrum in the case of Santa Clara Water District, which voted on to approve a set of guiding principles and support a single tunnel instead of a dual tunnel project, and the Westlands Water District, which just voted to not participate in the Cal WaterFix project. I'm sure there is going to be more action to come in this area, but that's the latest on the actions taken by water contractor agencies. California Department of Water Resources has initiated a bond validation action, which would authorize the department to sell revenue bonds to finance the design and construction. There have been lawsuits filed to prevent DWR from selling the bonds. That's an open matter. There have been a few reports, reviews by Department of Interior Inspector General, which was fairly critical of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and found that the Bureau of Reclamation had provided a federal subsidy to Central Valley project contractors for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and WaterFix planning costs and other critical matters related to that. The California State Auditor prepared a report just released last month in October that was requested by the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. And I should mention Marion Norris from Senator Galgiani's office is here in the audience, not to speak to this item or as the representative of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, but I just wanted to acknowledge her presence here. And even though the state auditor report found that there was not general fund money spent on Cal WaterFix or its predecessor, it did issue a series of critical findings related to other aspects of the project. And then finally, the last few pages of the staff report are just an update on where the permitting effort is on this project. And Michael George referenced the State Water Board and their proceedings related to the change in point of diversion for the state and federal water projects. This is a very good summary on page 3 of the staff report. I won't read it, but suffice it to say that part 1 is, at least the active part of part 1 has been wrapped up. The board has not yet ruled on part 1, but part 2 is initiating soon. Part 2 focusing on impacts to fish and wildlife and recreation. Part 1 focused on damage to existing legal users of water and flood protection. As I'm sure commission members are aware, DWR certified the environmental impact report back in July. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has not yet issued a record of decision approving the environmental impact statement for this project. And then the permitting agencies at the federal level, National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and at the state level, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, have issued either biological opinions or incidental take permits relating to aspects of Cal WaterFix, primarily the construction of the project as it relates to the state permit or the state incidental take permit. Not quite as detailed an opinion at by the federal agencies. Their biological opinion was just restricted to the tunnel construction and the expansion of Clifton Court Forebay. And then finally, there's Corps of Engineers permits that have not yet been issued. They generally occur later in the process. This is a very brief summary of this project. I'm probably not the best person in the world to answer very detailed questions. Our hope was that this would at least answer the basic questions that commission members had about this project and had requested an update on it. I know that our Delta Protection Advisory Committee had requested a similar document, and we'll be sharing this with them if they are not already aware of it as part of this commission meeting packet. But Mr. Chair, that's what I wanted to report on different activities, and I'm happy to answer any questions or at least give a good shot at answering any questions.
Any questions of Erik on California WaterFix or any other items associated with it? You're off the hook, Erik. Okay, we're going to move on to item 10. Pardon me? Sure. Please turn the card in after so we know who you are.
Good evening, Melinda Terry, the Central Valley Flood Control Association and North Delta Water Agency. And just to add on a couple of things I would mention is on the federal investigation report that was done by the Inspector General. Members of Congress have asked for two things as a follow-up to that report. One is a coalition of congressional members have asked for the House Natural Resources Committee to have a hearing in which U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, as well as from the Inspector General's office, would answer questions, particularly related to whether the Bureau is going to try and get the money back, a refund, if you will. And then the other request, then a similar coalition, but it wasn't the exact names of congressional members, have also asked for the GAO to do their own investigation, and that's the, I think it stands for Government Accountability Office. So they're kind of like our state auditor is the way I look at it. So there's follow-ups to those is my point. The other thing I would add on is that the WaterFix hearings, their petition for their change of diversion continues at the Water Board. January 18th, if you're not aware, is when they will start up again because they've had a little bit of an interim hiatus after the conclusion of Part 1. Part 1 was about injury to other water users, and they also included flood issues. Part 2 will be focusing on the fish and wildlife habitat. So it'll be very different, testimony, and the cases in chief will be by the environmental organizations this time, I suspect, versus, for instance, I'll just give an example. North Delta submitted case in chief in Part 1, but will not in Part 2. They will allow us to do rebuttal questioning of the witnesses that are submitting their cases. But that does start January 18th, and I assume will last several months, just like Part 1.
All right, thanks, Melinda. And I failed to ask, is there anyone else that would like to address the commission on this item or any other item that I don't have cards for? I just have one card for item 10. So if you want to speak, just fill out a card and hand it to the clerk. Chris?
Just a quick question, Melinda, I know you're filling out a card, but I'm curious, and I should know this, but I must have just forgotten. Has the North Delta Water Agency taken any legal action against WaterFix?
I would call filing a petition a legal action. I'm not an attorney, but I believe it is. And they certainly operate like a courtroom when they have their hearings. And North Delta has also filed a CEQA lawsuit and a lawsuit against the 2081 permit. We did not file a lawsuit against the biological opinions by the federal agencies, just the state Department of Fish and Wildlife 2081 permit. And that's because it was very different, its basis for rendering its decision than the biological opinions.
Got it, okay. And one other quick question, just for staff. Was DWR consulted, given that it's a sister agency on the staff report? Or was it just an entity that has filed legal action against the project itself?
I didn't send it off to them for review, but I stand by everything in the report. We were very careful just to present the facts here and try not to editorialize. And so I think this is really just all factual information in the report, and it's pretty stripped clear of any attempt to editorialize or. So
I agree with that.
as a result, I didn't send it to them.
Yeah.
In retrospect, maybe that would have been fine. I don't think it would change anything in the report. I'm sure they would want to put their own particular slant on it, but so would the opponents, and I tried to keep it pretty clear of that.
I would just offer up from agency's perspective, please reach out to DWR, it being DWR's project, for information on this.
Well, this is all public information, so that's all well documented too. So your point's well taken, but by the same token, this was just really factual information in this report, so.
And Chris, if I may, I tried to get him to include an $84 million number in his report, and he wouldn't do it because he says, I really can't verify it at this point. So he's very careful, and I think the report is is not editorialized, as Eric indicated.
Oh, no, I agree. I'm honestly just offering up as a resource,
Okay,
DWR just being another state agency, so.
all right.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. I have another card on item 10, so if anyone else would like to speak, just fill out the card and give it to Ashley. Okay, Eric, you're going to introduce the next item 10.
Yes. Item 10 is an update on abandoned and derelict vessels in the Delta. And commission members who are present at the September meeting in Stockton will recall a presentation by Adele Lagomarsino on this topic based on some work that a graduate student had done over the summer working under the auspices of both the Delta Protection Commission and Cal Department of Fish and Wildlife's Office of Spill Prevention and Response. And the discussion clearly indicated interest in this topic. We know that it's something that many different people throughout the Delta are working on in a concerted manner. And so I wanted to pull together at least a little bit of a briefing tonight for the commission about the problem. It's probably a problem that is familiar to some commission members and probably many members of the audience. But our two speakers tonight will lay out some background information about abandoned and derelict vessels and where the efforts are to improve the both the removal of these, but also creating the right conditions so that we have fewer abandoned and derelict vessels to contend with. And the two speakers I'd like to introduce in the order that they'll be presenting. The first is Mitch Good, who's a Fish and Wildlife Officer with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Office of Spill Prevention and Response, or OSPR. OSPR's role is to provide immediate response to oil spills, hazmat incidents, and other damaging substances that threaten waters of the state. And he'll be providing a presentation with a good overview. And then following Mitch will be Peter Pelkofer, who is with the California State Lands Commission. He was a longtime attorney with the State Lands Commission. He's now a retired annuitant with the State Lands Commission, who is working on the commission's, that is the State Lands Commission's, abandoned vessel program. He's had a lot of experience, has really been a spearheading force for much of the recent legislative efforts on abandoned vessels, and we're really pleased to have both of these gentlemen here with us this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch first, and then to be followed by Peter.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My get up here. I know I look like a stormtrooper. You guys are all very official here. And sorry, it's been a long day for me. I was at a meeting this morning. Peter was there. Recreational Boaters of California. So we're just hitting the meeting circuit between Contra Costa and Yolo County. I apologize. I did not create this PowerPoint. And my hope was that somebody higher up the food chain would be here to present it. And like Eric said, I believe, and I apologize, I wasn't there for that meeting either, but you said it was in Stockton that Annie presented. So I don't know if anybody was there. My understanding, she did a really good job. I would have liked to have been there. The work that she did in the 3 months that she was with, well, DPC and Fish and Wildlife, was instrumental in putting together our unofficial program within OSPR. So I will see if I can do her justice and our agency justice. Like I said, I'm Mitch Good, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, OSPR, which is the Office of Spill Prevention and Response. As a, you might ask, I don't know if you guys are familiar, I mean, as a game warden, people might know what that is, hunting and fishing typically, but the Office of Spill Prevention and Response, OSPR, was created to deal with spills related to pipelines, tanker vessels, things of that nature. That's kind of our bread and butter, but over the years we've come across a lot of this type of situation. And again, people ask, well, why is OSPR dealing with vessels? Well, it has to do with not just the tanker vessels that come into the bay and offload their cargo. These vessels can carry thousands of gallons of diesel, fuel oil, things of that nature. So we've been responding to these spills and sheens and things like that associated with these commercial vessels and recreational vessels. So again, if this is kind of, if you guys have heard this before from Annie, I apologize. As an OSPR warden, my main focus, and Erik kind of touched on that, is response, and we are the investigatory individuals that handle that for the state. In marine waters, that probably doesn't mean much to anybody here, but marine waters, the definition as it relates to the federal government would be Coast Guard waters. And then anything inland of those waters are US EPA. About two and a half years ago, Fish and Wildlife OSPR, we mirrored the Coast Guard's definition and we responded to spills in the marine zone over 42 gallons. 2.5 years ago, we created a program statewide where we are now responding to every petroleum spill in the state. Theoretically, we were responding statewide anyways, but now it's very formalized. And so we, OSPR wardens, are dealing with all the spills within the state. Fast forward, I transferred up here. I started out in Ventura dealing with spill response, working for OSPR Fish and Game. And about 5 years ago, I transferred back up to the Sacramento area. And about a year after that, I started on the Abandoned and Derelict Vessel Task Force, co-chairing it with Coast Guard. That's where I met Peter, some of the other folks. And the reason why Fish and Wildlife was involved with this is because, again, these issues we were having and seeing from these abandoned and derelict vessels. Ground zero, I would say, is the Delta and the Bay, Richardson Bay. But as I try to remind everybody in our ADV meetings, that this is a statewide problem. San Diego, Moss Landing, Morro Bay, everybody's dealing with it. But again, I think ground zero has been the Bay and the Delta for many reasons. So, see if I can get past the first slide here. The reason why I think Steve Hampton, our Assistant Deputy Administrator, was the one who created this PowerPoint. This vessel here, which is, I believe, is a commercial fishing vessel, which is now on the rocks and is sitting like that at Cayucas. Is that correct? The Point Estero, which has been a thorn in the side of many people and many agencies dealing with this problem. It's down, again, Cayucas, and it sits there because we don't have the funding to deal with these commercial vessels, these steel-hulled vessels that pose many challenges. How do you get it out of there? How does this happen? People don't realize this happens. There's there's probably a dozen vessels that are kind of in this condition throughout the state of that size. And we're charged with trying to figure out what to do with it. The fuel, the petroleum products, the hazmat on board. Again, that's why we've been brought into it. And I thought this was a good picture. Actually, Steve and I discussing it, we thought it was a good picture because it's not where it should be, but it sits there. So the problem, again, I'm talking about the Bay and the Delta, primarily the Delta, which seems to be a really big issue, and it has been for years. We've talked about amongst ourselves, the game wardens in OSPR, our chain of command, why does it seem like the biggest problem has been in the Delta? And we have our own thoughts on that. I think it's related in some part to the called the crash, the housing crash, 2008, and after that. The thing to remember is boats are a luxury item, and when people can't pay their bills, then other things suffer. The other thing, one of the other major problems I think out in the Delta is There's a lot of people that have substance abuse problems. We see it like the houseboat, the sailboat. They have these lofty ideas. They go out, they're doing illicit things on these vessels, and they end up looking like this. Run up on the rocks. I think a lot of these pictures, Steve had taken himself when I took him out on patrol to show him, trying to educate him as to the problem. Again, if Annie touched on some of this, I'm hoping she did. And I think the pictures that Steve chose show how varying the issue is, from sailboats to houseboats to the one in the middle, the last one I put up, this crane barge. You can't see the actual barge that it's sitting on, but this is out along the Delta Loop, which some of you might be familiar with.
River's Edge.
Is it River's Edge Marina?
River's Edge Marina.
So this individual who owns this crane barge has a number of other large equipment out in the Delta. Sitting underneath that crane is about a 120-foot barge. Next to it is, I think, a 60 or 70-foot barge, all sitting below about 2 to 3 foot of water. How do you get that out of there? Who's going to pay for it? Is it the person who allowed it to get to this condition, has $5 in the bank, in his name? Thus, we have been spending years trying to figure out how do we resolve these problems. That would be considered, commercial typically. The other ones might be recreational. There's been a big issue statewide with the differentiation between recreational and commercial vessels. I don't want to go too far into the weeds on that, but trying to shore up funding for this problem is kind of where we're at with dealing with the problem. So here's, I believe this is the legal definition of abandon. There's been some changes in the Harvard Nav Code to address what we call marine debris, some things that have been added. Actually, Peter drew up the language on that. This vessel here was in a marina that we responded to that was sheening, and this is, a common occurrence. This is happening every day. I get calls because I'm the individual who unknowingly, was tasked with this, hey, can you go to these meetings? 4 years later, this is what I do. I get calls, I'm not exaggerating, all throughout the state, hey, you're the abandoned and derelict vessel guy. And I say, I'm just a game warden, why do I have to be the abandoned and derelict vessel guy? But, the thought is that there's somebody that knows what to do. And there's no one person that knows exactly what to do, because we're not like some of the other states where we have things shored up with our laws, regulations we're never going to completely prevent it, but to address these issues. And we keep coming back to funding. Most, or if not all these photos, again, were either out myself or Steve or someone else that was out with me taking photos of this. So a couple years ago, this is actually another photo that I took from the air. This is down at, I can't remember if it's Antioch or Pittsburgh, but along the Contra Costa shoreline. Fast forward, realizing that we have a real issue here, dealing with it in Osper, and going to these meetings, Abandoned and Derelict Vessel Task Force meetings, for years. My thought was that we needed to escalate this to up the chain of command and to the administrator of OSPR to see what we could do on that level. Fast forward this year, we created a survey, which I think Annie talked about, an aerial survey, where we identified where it was literally myself and one of our fishing game pilots who flew around the Delta. And I don't know if she showed the corkscrews that we did trying to get our 200 plus vessels, the waypoints, to identify these vessels. We came up with about 200 plus, and that was just identifying vessels that we knew for certain would qualify as abandoned or derelict within this area boundaried by the Sacramento, basically Old Sacramento, Carquinez, and then out to Stockton. So it was about 10, 11 days of flying, coming back down, circling back around because we missed it, and coming back around because we missed it again, and hitting with the waypoint, then to try to have Annie come up with some beautiful presentation like that. She showed this, right? She didn't show it.
No, that's okay, but you can
Sorry.
speed through it.
All right. So the black lines are our flight patterns. All the different colored dots represent a vessel or multiple vessels that we identified as abandoned derelict vessels. Like I said, there was about 200 plus, and we wanted to, the goal was to go then and ground truth it on the water and gather more data that we couldn't gather from the air. Type of structure of the vessel, you know, the condition beyond just knowing that it was abandoned or derelict. And we chose this box to try to go out on the water and ground truth it. We, this summer, went out one time, and we never reached any of the vessels that I found on the water because we couldn't get to them due to draft of the water being so low. The only two vessels that we did actually put our hands on were two new vessels, abandoned and derelict, that we added to the survey. This is what we came up with from that aerial survey, from my notes that Annie was, again, compiling. And as you can see, what, 230, 237? Or, yeah, 237. And then try to do a good job of, again, in my notes, flying binoculars, handheld GPS, and the pilot making sure that, you know, we weren't flying into lines or something like that. Taking down notes to identify what kind of vessel, what color, what shape, you know, is it upside down? And this is some of the information that we compiled from my notes that Annie put into these graphs.
Mitch, just a quick question. So
Yes.
if you list them as sunk, those are ones you can still see from the air, from the water surface. That doesn't, if they were submerged to a depth that you could not see them, then that's not reflected here. Is that
For
right?
the most part.
Yeah.
You know, you'd be surprised what you can see too. Again, you know, we had a high water year, so we took that into consideration for different things. But we knew that we probably missed maybe 10, 15% more. But as you can see, I mean, it was kind of funny when Annie was asking me, what did you mean by these, you know, when you wrote this? I said, I don't know. I mean, we found 60 boats that day, but I tried to be as accurate as possible. And then once I explained to her, showing photos, things like that, like you're describing, say partially submerged, maybe half of it's underwater. This is just another image of where the vessels were found and the different classifications. So I don't know about the rest of you. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but that to me is, it's troubling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And many of these, we work closely with the sheriff's departments. They're the ones that receive boating and waterways funding to go and remove these vessels. There's the VTIP program, the AWAF program. I don't know if you guys are familiar. VTIP is the Vessel Turning Program. AWAF is Abandoned Watercraft Abatement Fund. Typically, all these vessels would fall under the AWAF fund for removal. The sheriff's departments, the local marine agencies, enforcement agencies, a lot of these they didn't even know about, which is another troubling statistic. This is just an example of what Annie and Steve were able to do back in the office, the vessels, the points that we had, we put on the map. Annie then went back, and she was able to look back through different satellite imagery and see how long some of these vessels have been there. But it's not just showing how long they've been there. So that was 13 to 14. I don't know if you guys can still see it right there. So that's another good example where, again, if you're seeing it from the air, you can see the shape of the hull, but you can't see it when you're on the water. For the most part, you can't see it. The other aspect that was troubling is that, you know, some of these vessels, they might have been there 60 years, but they were used maybe as like ballast to kind of create these islands, to shore up some of these islands. And those were added to, some of those were added to the total count. This is out at Herman and Helens. I don't know if you guys have ever been out there. So the goal was, again, looking at why are we doing this survey? Well, to try to look at maybe a program with different agencies to address it, look at funding sources, and try to come up with some numbers to see if we were to take them, remove them all, what would that cost look like? One-time shot. And this is what, working with some folks from Cal Recycle, some of our folks who've been doing this for years, you know, response, and knowing with the contractors how much some of the stuff costs. This is just legacy vessels, nothing next year, the following year. Legacy vessels, this is a rough estimate, but I'll be honest, I mean, that's probably, that might even be low. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Spirit of Sacramento, the one that sank out in Contra Costa 2 years ago, last year. Years are running together. All said and done, that vessel, which was sold by the U.S. Marshal's Office, cost $3 million to remove and destroy. It's not sustainable. And it was nowhere near the size of that vessel. So some of the things, and Peter really is much better, more articulate about, you know, what are we looking to do, the changes we want to make. Some of the things that we've done in this program and survey is looking at what can we do, what can we change. One of them being insurance requirements, another being looking at registration fees, and bringing in the commercial side of the house. This was, I think, what Steve had brought up, or I mean, had created. So on the bottom it says removal cost, number of abandoned derelict vessels. That's a boat up there. Response, removal. That'll make a little more sense here. Grant program to ports, counties. Funding only covers approximately 150 vessels a year through DBOB, boating waterways. Recreational vessels only. Cal Recycle has done projects to remove certain vessels, the Oakland Estuary cleanup, but currently they are out of the business for marine cleanup, boats, things of that nature. State lands. Army Corps on the federal side of the house only deal with navigational hazards. Navigational hazard? Yeah, I mean, if it's abandoned, that's not a navigational hazard. So, this is something that we deal with on a daily basis. If the vessel runs aground on the rocks, say on a levee down in the Delta, and it's spewing oil, Coast Guard, Fish and Game, we respond. We deal with the cleanup. the thing sits there. Coast Guard doesn't do removal. They're not in the business of salvage. If it's not in a navigational waterway, right in the middle, affecting navigation, it will sit there. And there are a number of vessels where, over the years, it could be 5 feet out of the main channel, and it sits. Because, and it's nothing against Army Corps, there's not enough funding. I get calls daily on all these type of vessels. Again, I'm the abandoned and derelict vessel guy. Every day something is happening, a vessel goes down, and it's one that we consider the abandoned or derelict vessel, category. Again, OSPR, Coast Guard on the federal side of the house. They're basically our sister agency, and we currently only deal with oil and hazmat. No DPC OSPR. So Steve's box up there, response removal funding. You can see the different colors, guaranteed case by case and none. State lands, NOAA, DPC, OSPR, none. Is kind of the point. Boating waterways funding is not available to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and state lands as state agencies. Yet we are, especially as game wardens, whether it be OSPR wardens, district wardens, we come across probably the most new vessels out on patrol. And we have no way of dealing with it other than if it's sheening or has oil coming off of it. And I think that's actually it. So, in reality, we could be here till midnight talking about this problem.
We have a couple of questions for you.
Yes, sir.
Brian?
Yeah, I just have a question regarding the funding. I know that the Boating and Waterways has the fund and the counties have access to that. I know state lands and Fish and Wildlife don't have access to that. You talked about the commercial vehicles being the long tail of that and the really heavy, difficult things. There's no funding for removing commercial vessels, but recreational vessels can be removed with that. Is there any, can you make any dent with the funds available? Are the counties leveraging that money? Because I know in past years that money really wasn't being matched and leveraged. So where are we at with that?
So let's say total funding through the different, again, the VTIP vessel turn-in program and the AWAF abandoned watercraft. So think of vessels sank. The counties, the sheriff's office would use that funding, typically the AWAF funding. I think it was last year or 2 years ago, to try to, because it's not always cut and dry. So the Boating Waterways came up with a SAVE funding, surrender abandoned vessel or something. I don't know, I can't, too many acronyms. But it basically was an overarching fund so that if an agency, requested $100,000, they could use it for either situation. The current funding for that whole program, is my point, is roughly, is it 2.5 now?
2.7 this year, which is up on
$2.7 million last year, and the previous, say, 4 or 5 years was about 1.3 to 1.7 million. This last year, because of our ranting and raving, they came up with $1 million more. I use the example of the Spirit of Sacramento, that one vessel that was sold and actually was in decent condition by the marshal's office was $3 million, not funded by Boating Waterways. It was Coast Guard, Contra Costa County, and other agencies. One vessel cost more than the state budget for any situation, whether it be vessel turn-in, think somebody wants to get rid of Grandpa's boat on a trailer, or one that's sunk in a really bad way that they're removing from the water.
But again, the big vessels and the heavy ones, just take those out of the equation.
They don't even
If we have the
qualify.
small funding, if there's 158 recreational vehicles,
boats.
That's okay.
And they're, 4,000 average to remove them.
Yeah.
And you guys have done some great work, Annie and you and Peter in Ground Truth, and you're starting to identify where these are at, giving that information to the counties to identify and get the low-hanging fruit
Right.
out. Is that
Are we,
a plan, or is that a possibility to leverage that money to at least get the junk out of there, and we're left with obviously the big ticket items?
so I would say that, I guess to answer your question in a different format is the counties, Contra Costa, Solano, Yolo County, or Sacramento County, they are probably the most active in the state. Again, we have to remember that this is a statewide problem. They have their own tally of what they that they know they want to attack, meaning the recreational boats. And so they might have, like Contra Costa, they might remove 100 boats in 1 year. They put in the request, the grant application, and I think it was last year they got 200,000, or this year they got 200,000. They are very successful in using all of that money. There's not enough money. I'm trying to answer but it has to be dispersed to all these agencies that put in for it.
Right. So Contra Costa's leveraging their money, and they usually do. Are the other 4 Delta counties leveraging? Are they maxing out on what they can do and
Oh, absolutely.
matching that?
So, yeah.
I can speak to Solano. We get a small amount, but we only had 2 vessels that we removed, and the sheriff came before the board, and I thought, this is great, you got rid of those 2 boats. Well, we added 3 more after those 2 were removed.
Right.
So we're using every dollar that we get.
And then some. And I think that's the point that, so, doing this for 4 or 5 years now, my motivation is that I have to respond as a fish and game warden in Osper when a spill report comes in through the governor's office. I think the reason why we've been so involved is because we keep seeing the same vessels. We keep seeing these derelict boats that people they have no right owning these vessels. They shouldn't be owning these vessels. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. They get them for $1 in a lien sale. I mean, I could tell you about the vessel that we just found out about, a 90-foot tug that sold for $1, that we're going to see again, that the federal government, Coast Guard, just spent 2 years ago, big bucks to raise it and pump off the oil. That was just sold yesterday, or whenever it was last week, in a Marshall's, U.S. Marshall's sale. I mean, there's so many different, issues with this whole problem that if we deal with the recreational, they are hammering it. But like you said, and I wish Contra Costa was here. They could remove 200 boats. There's 50 more in a week. I'm not exaggerating.
I was just curious about enforcement and who the owners going after them and if there's fines or.
So, it's a good question, and we do what we can. The people that are doing, like the Marine units that are using these funds, the sheriff's deputies on the Marine unit that are going full bore with trying to remove these vessels, they know exactly what they can do, what they can't do. They've been doing it for years, many years. It's tough, and I don't agree with it, but somebody who trades a houseboat that's not in very good condition for a 6-pack of beer, and that person trades it to this other person for some illicit things, and that person trades it for something else, a bike tire, not exaggerating. It's hard to track down who the owner is. Mm-hmm. But the deputies, the PD, the Marine units, they do what they can, and they do a great job. But the point on that is that it's nothing against the DA's office, but if you file a case, if you take enforcement action, these people have nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I'll be honest, I think that when it goes to submittal for a case review, DA's office, their hands are tied too, because there's nothing, it's not about getting something from those people, but it's not worth their time, unfortunately. The people that, these photos that we're seeing, those are not the good people that are maintaining their vessels. I think that's a key here.
Okay, any other questions for Mitch? If not, oh, I'm sorry, Eddie.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Thank you. First off, in terms of this report and the study that you guys did, is this, have you put it together as a report and shared it with the counties? Would be one question. And then the other side is, have you, outside of state funding and state resources, have you looked at grant opportunities at the federal level? Because, I mean, having this kind of information, identifying the problem, knowing the cost levels, it seems like it's a very, straightforward federal grant.
So like I said, I used to be a game warden. I mean, I guess technically that's what I get paid as, but I'm not really a game warden anymore. I'm this person sitting behind a desk trying to figure this stuff out. We've participated in all these different conventions, seminars, things like that. We're working with NOAA, NIMS, anybody. There's a woman by the name of Sherry Lippiat who presents for us on the federal side certain grant funding. We know there's some stuff within the state available, but the problem is, and we're putting it out to the counties and the different marine units, the problem is it's the mechanism by which they can get that funding. And this is where, again, Peter would know better, but my point is that they can't really access those funds because it's they've got to have they've got a good faith, or what's
Can I introduce Peter Pelkover to Mitch? Thank you very much. This might be a good opportunity for Peter to step in and take over. I know we've been at this for quite a while. So Peter Pelkover, retired annuitant with State Lands Commission.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Let me see if I can respond a little bit further to your question. I've been doing this for about 10 years now for the State Lands Commission. Mitch made it fairly clear, but let me make it crystal clear, as they say, that we get no funding. The State Lands Commission, no state agency that I know of gets any kind of funding at all. We've been somewhat successful in dealing with some of these things because we've gotten cooperation, as Mitch pointed out, from Cal Recycle in one case when we did a great big sweep in the Oakland estuary. But the problem with getting federal funding, or even there's Prop 1 money out there, we went looking for it, right? Because I'm looking for money all the time to see if I can do something that will pay for any of this stuff. You have to front end the money. In other words, if we were going to take out one of these large vessels for 600 or 1,000 or $1 million, the State Lands Commission has to come up with that money out of their budget, and then they'll pay us back when they get around to it. That's Prop 1, that's NOAA, that's, almost anything I've ever looked at. So the only time we, as a State Lands Commission or a state agency, gets anywhere is if we can find something. We got some grants out of the Costco Busan oil spill thing, 600,000. Cal Recycle added to that an extra 600,000. And then US EPA jumped on the bandwagon eventually. And the cleanup in the Oakland estuary was close to $6 million. We took out 57 vessels, not all recreational vessels, even whatever. And state lands makes no distinction, incidentally, even though the statutes do. The funding that comes from the boating waterways is exclusively for recreational vessels. So it's not usable for any of these things. The first vessel that Mitch showed you up there is the Point Estero. It's sitting on the rocks down above San Luis Obispo. It's probably going to stay there forever, unless somebody can come up with some funding, because it's a commercial vessel. It's probably on state lands, to the best of our knowledge, because it's sitting in the ocean, in effect, but nobody's going to take it off of there. And even though we probably would have authority to do so, because our statutes provide for that kind of thing, it doesn't become an abandoned vessel if the owner refuses to acknowledge its abandonment. This guy wanted to keep his vessel. He figured he could get it off of there. So there's a real distinction. I mean, we talk generally about abandoned vessels. And Mitch pointed out a definition of abandonment, but basically abandonment is if the owner has given up the vessel completely and not given it to anyone else. So there's technically now no owner. You know, this guy, at the point in time when maybe someone could have gotten in there and pulled that vessel off the rocks, he said, no, it's my vessel. So it's sitting there, and it'll probably sit there for a long time. Now, I want to follow up on something. Am I plugged in here? Yes.
And Peter, can you speak closer into the microphone? So we're we're recording this and we post it after the meeting.
So you can sue me for it then later?
No, we just want to hear all your wisdom, and everyone should be able to hear it. So.
Oh, hey, fantastic. You saw something like this that, excuse me, that Mitch put up. I'm trying to get this thing to move out of the way, and it doesn't want to do so. Anyway, when Annie took all the information that Mitch and provided her by his overflights, each of these things, of course, he recorded the latitude and longitude of each of the locations, but he did it from the air. And so they're not spot on accurate in all cases. In any case, we took that information, that data, he provided it to us. We took it to our IT department, who are very good at dealing with maps and graphics, and they put it on a system. And I don't know anything about this stuff except what I see, but they put it on this map, as you can see up there, and those are pretty much the 200 vessels in the Delta that he found. Those are the locations of them. And what we have started to do is what I call ground truthing. The green dots on there are ones that we've actually visited the site on the ground, if you will, or on the water. We've located them. If I can, well, I have one up there. Which one is that? It doesn't matter. It's a bunch of numbers. Anyway, when we go out, we check to see whether the latitude and longitude is correct. We make the correction on the record if that's necessary. We look at the things that they reported. You can see the things along, so it's perhaps a barge, whatever. They recorded a bunch of information. We verify that, we change it if necessary, and we take a picture. In this case, that's the sunken vessel or the abandoned vessel that we found at that location. So this is a process we've just started. It would take, I think, a long time for us to go through all 200, and these are all in the Delta. This morning at our abandoned vessel working group meeting, I got a offer from the Coast Guard Auxiliary, who has a number of boats, and they've said, hey, we'll go out there and check those for you. So I haven't started to work with them yet, but we will be working with them to go out and check every one of these. Now, what's the purpose of all this? It gets back to what Mitch was talking about, and that is if we can demonstrate to the legislature, to the folks who might provide us with money, how large this problem is, then maybe we can get some funding. So that's what we're trying to do. If we get enough pictures, we get enough dots on the map. And again, this is only in the Delta, and of course, my responsibilities are not limited to the Delta by any means. I mean, mine are statewide. As Mitch has a territory, my territory is the state of California. As you probably know, the commission is the owner trustee of the submerged lands of the state, which is something like 4 million acres. So there's a whole lot of water out there. Like Mitch, I get calls. Something breaks loose. The Coast Guard has called me at 4 o'clock in the morning to tell me that a large vessel was floating down the river and saying, what are you going to do about it? And I say, yeah, right. We have a 26-foot boat. It's a nice boat. It's not going to handle a 300-foot vessel that happens to be floating down the river. So anyway, that's our purpose. Mitch has given you a whole good overview. I'll answer some questions, but I think, we've used up enough of your time tonight. Please, if I can answer something, let me do that.
Questions of Peter? Chris?
I'm just thinking back to Mr. George's presentation on consumptive use when, he was talking about looking at creative ways of coming up with financing when financing,
Right.
while there's an obvious need, is somehow difficult to come up with in
Right.
the face of that obvious need. And a lot of it comes back to, at least the suggestion that was made was, can we reframe the problem? And in that case, turns out that Hyacinth is a huge water user, so maybe putting the fear of water use into the right person's mind might be able to free up something. That was the concept that was at least put forward. In this case, has there ever been part of the study or another sort of coordinated quantification of the actual environmental degradation or inhibitor or anything that we could say that would sum up the totality of the problem?
Well, that's one of the things that I think needs to be studied and researched. It's not, I was hoping one of these years we'd get one of these Sea Grant fellows at the State Lands Commission that had enough biological background that we could get to do this, because I think, people say, well, okay, this is a Delta problem. Who drinks that water that comes out of the Delta? Los Angeles?
Right.
What's in that water, because all these vessels are deteriorating? Whether, Mitch gets all the chemicals out, maybe. They're rusting. There are any number of them that have wooden superstructures that have burned. All that's gone into the water. All this stuff all these contaminants are in the water. The longer these things sit there in the Delta, you got more contaminants in the water. I think if we made a point of that, and I'm hoping from what we're doing, we can do that as well. There's any number of parts of this that probably require some additional research to make a really, forceful presentation. But that certainly should be done, and I agree.
Anything else, Chris?
I would be happy to work with you on brainstorming some ideas for both public finance to deal with the issue and additional ways of getting at the research questions.
Great.
Okay.
Fantastic. Talk to Brian.
Yeah, I just want to speak on Peter's behalf. I've worked with Peter for the past 5-7 years or so on a daily basis, and he's about as creative as they come. As he said, we oversee 4.5 million acres statewide. He's a retired annuitant, devoting all his time to really trying to clean up primarily the Delta because of the proximity and where we can get to. But he deserves kind of a special award or something just for his creative thinking and pulling together different groups and different people. And I just wanted to point that out to everybody, how valuable a resource he is to cleaning up the waterways throughout the state.
I think we have a winning combination, creativity and maybe a little money. What do you think, Chris?
The money's the answer. The people ask me what the problems are, and as far as I'm concerned with removing vessels, both the recreational and the commercial, is we need money, and the other thing we need is a location to actually scrap them. Because you may be aware that we have very strict environmental laws in California. So strict, in fact, that the ships from the mothball fleet that were off of Pittsburgh in that area,
Sure.
they ended up taking them all the way to Texas to scrap them because we can't scrap them in California. The environmental laws prevent it. In fact, they actually ran the shipyard out of business that was going to do that.
Don't you see some irony here? Environmental laws, and they're just wasting away in the Delta. We're not removing them.
We were doing pretty good a number of years back when the price of steel was good. People would take them.
Okay.
But with no, you can't recoup that now to make it worthwhile. So,
All right, Peter.
all right, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay.
We have two speakers on this from the public. Peter Robertson.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the board. Thanks for having me. I'm Peter Robertson. I'm the president of the Recreational Boaters of California. California has about 4 million recreational boaters, not including canoes, kayaks, and other vessels. DMV has a hard job coming up with the numbers for registered vessels here in California, be they trailered or moored. And it is a problem. We recognized that a problem 2.5 decades ago, I guess. Started up a fund that then the Department of Boating and Waterways took under their wing to manage. Part of the money from your CF sticker, registration fee, California, went into that fund. Gas money, gas tax money, which used to be captured at marinas, now it's captured every time a gallon of gas is sold, 0.0000016 of a cent. Goes into that fund, and that's used to clean up recreational boaters who abandon their boats. As Mitch said, do they turn into crack houses, which was a nice boat before? Do they get traded? Yeah, they do. We see it all the time. The term for us for them is not good river rats, if you will. They're the ones who leave at the end of the summer or in the winter, go south, and leave their boat behind, or boats that they accumulate over the time. And I've been on some of those boats. And to say that they're hazmat is to be kind when you look at them. Complete. They're disasters, and they're expensive to get rid of. But we have a fund to take care of those boats. We also have the voluntary turn-in program. I just did one of those myself. Total fee for me to get rid of an 18-foot ski boat. Had to take the engine off it, had to take the batteries out, had to take the fuel tanks out, clean it, take it to the county dump. Cost me $56 to do that. Took the trailer to the recycling, metal recycler. He gave me $12, but I had to take the tires. That's how it is when you try to get rid of something as small as that. But it's doable. Problem, I think, with VTIP is it doesn't get advertised. It needs to get pushed out more. People need to know it. We need some public service announcements on it. We need to, dock walkers and other groups need to take that out and let people know there is a way to get rid of your boat or grandpa's boat that you find behind his garage that's been sitting there for 30 years that no one knows about, and you sell the house and it's got to go. The commercial vessels is another story. We capture money from recreational boats to go into a recreational boat cleanup fund, and we're fine with that. The thought of taking that money, and it's not that much when you really look at the dollar figures on it, it would not clean up the Spirit of Sacramento, which I think was about $3 million. Mitch was talking about that. One big boat wipes out the fund. So we would like to see some kind of mechanism for commercial funding. Insurance, funding, there's a million ways to think about doing that from people who are a lot smarter than I am. We like to keep the money for the recreational vessels the way it is right now. It works, the program works. When the sheriff comes to us or comes to the Department of Boating and Waterways, and very often we get involved. A lot of people know who we are and what we do, and they're happy to talk to us about it. And we'll steer them in that direction. We've had marina owners call us up, what do I do with, I got a lean sailboat, didn't sell, and it's now sinking in my dock, not totally submerged yet. Well, it's a recreational boat. If you don't know who owns it, can't follow that lead, you can go to the Division of Boating and Waterways to get some cash to help you with that. So that's where we are on that, and that's how we feel about the difference between commercial and recreational. And we know we got some bad apples in the recreational stuff. That's why the fund is there to take care of them. Any questions? And we've, there's been a couple of new bills coming in the last 3 years. We support abandoned vessel program, but we went against the one where they wanted to raid the recreational boater fund because we knew one big boat would wipe it out. All right. Any questions, sir?
For Peter, any comments? I just have one comment. I've had a boat in my barn for probably 30 years. And don't tell my wife about that turn-in program.
That's my next call. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you. Our next speaker, Barbara Daly.
Oh, I can't see you with them on. It's for reading. Hello, my name is Barbara Daly, and many of you know me as a member of the Delta Protection Commission Advisory Committee, but I'm here tonight with a different hat on. I'm here tonight to talk about the abandoned vessels and boats problem that I've been working on for the last several months. And I went to Annie Daly's talk, and I have it on video. If any of you would like it, it's only about a half hour long, and just let me know. I'd be happy to send it to you. It's really, really very good. My different hat is representing a man here tonight. His name is Gene Culver, and he has a new group called the Delta Legacy Horizons Group, and this group is focused on removing derelict and abandoned vessels and those things like cars and refrigerators and other things that are leaching toxins into the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And the group submitted a preliminary planning grant proposal to the Delta Conservancy for Prop 1 funding for improving water quality and other state benefits. And Gene has experience in doing this. He's been in business in the Delta for 40 years, and it's in Walnut Grove, and he's removed vessels from the water, mostly for insurance purposes. And his operation in this case with the Delta Legacy Horizons would be to remove the vessels, the autos, et cetera, process them down into much smaller, friendly landfill, and he has a process to do that. The group, however, decided not to go forward with a full proposal at this time because the 501c3 has not been approved yet, and this is one of the criteria for submission to be accepted for the grant money. But the group does plan to go forward with the work, and it will be an ongoing process. Delta Legacy Horizons would like to be part of the solution. We would like to, and they would like to help maximize resources like you're talking about. This group would like to collaborate and find help and support from all of you and other agencies to minimize the red tape barriers that would be in front of us to remove these vessels. And so if I may, I would like to introduce Gene at this time. And if you have any questions for him, or if you'd like to discuss this with him, I'd like you to know who he is. So Gene, could you come forward? And would you like to say anything about the presentations tonight?
They are all fantastic.
Step up to the mic.
They are all fantastic, and the work they're doing is so unappreciated. I've been working on the Delta for 41 years as a commercial provider for emergency tows, emergency salvage. Most of my business and my work has been on call from either vessel owners in stricken vessel situations where they needed somebody immediately in the middle of the night, Thanksgiving dinner time. It didn't matter. They were out doing their recreating, and they either ran aground and they needed assistance. So we provided that for years and years and years. Insurance companies have hired us on several occasions to raise vessels. My efforts and I apologize, I'm not a good public speaker. I'm a busted knuckle mechanic.
Darn good one.
But what my instruments are showing me, we have a vessel that we run on a regular basis, and what my instruments are showing me is that there's a lot more below the surface The 200 plus that they've spotted is just a fraction of what is actually stacking up, piling up, starting to accumulate at choke points, and it's been going on for years. This is not a new phenomenon. This is something that has, as long as people have been occupying the Delta, they've been discarding the debris from the small river towns down little chutes right into the river, and there's contaminants going on. My concern is the contaminants, not only the sunken and abandoned vehicles and vessels, but what's going on as they decay. The different chemicals that they interact with. DWR tests 3 feet below the surface. They test 5 feet above the bottom. Well, believe it or not, a lot of these items that decay, if they're gaseous enough, they go to the surface, they interact with solar heat, either start into the evaporation, get into the air streams, sometimes land back down, sometimes go back up, but they all interact. The other heavier metals, the chromiums, the leads, I was taking notes back there, thinking my mind was starting to race. The plastics, the foams, the copper oxide, one of the most poisonous things to mankind. They have, these substances have known carcinogens. They are known in the state of California to be carcinogens, and yet we tend to ignore the stuff we don't see. And that's kind of where I think we need to be starting to focus to get these folks the money to go ahead and remove the obvious, the stuff they can see and grab real easy. The new paints, the new synthetic oils, the gear lubes, this stuff is nasty. When it starts to break down and interact molecularly with some of our other products that we're ending up on the riverbed, it's going into our groundwater. It's ending up in our food chain. It's going into our crops. And it will affect long term, but it will affect. Has anybody got any questions?
All right. Well, thank you, and get that 501c3 designation, and you'll be able to get some money from the conservancy.
Thanks to Don's help, I think we're starting to rattle some chains.
Okay. Thank you, Gene, Barbara. And our last speaker on this item is Melinda Terry.
Melinda Terry, now speaking as a resident of the Delta. I just have 2 suggestions that kind of occurred to me when Chris Chernell brought up his question. And I think it was Peter that I'm not going to use the right word because it's not interns that you get, they're scholars that they get each year. The Delta Stewardship Council gets several of them, and I thought that was a great study that your commission might want to recommend to the DSC, or at least talk to that group and see if one of them might be interested. And also, usually annually, the Delta Independent Science Board asks for suggestions on things, science that's still needed. And so I think if they had a recommendation come from the commission, that would elevate it on their radar, because they're always looking for those issues. And then the other place to offer to the 2 gentlemen that gave their presentation to look for money too, and again, I think it was Chris's question that brought it to mind, was all of those other environmental impacts related just to the water quality, and the last speaker was highlighting some of those as well, that the State Water Resources Control Board, I didn't hear mentioned as a source for funding, but when it comes to the toxic water type stuff, they might be willing to partner with entities that want to look for the other funding sources as well.
Thanks, Melinda. Are there any comments on this item? I mean, we heard about a crisis in the Delta. We spend all this money trying to restore the ecosystem, and yet we're missing an obvious problem. So I see Senator Galgiani's rep is out there cornering everybody as they walk out the door. So maybe she'll be able to help. But I think those of us around the table that have contacts, work for the state, this is an obvious problem that needs money, and so we ought to start working on it. Don?
Yeah, just real briefly, I think this is something that's going to be timely and before us for a while, and I would suggest that, just as we've done this evening, that, maybe, either every 6 months or certainly as needed, as opportunities arise for us either to be supportive or to advocate, and as Melinda maybe suggested, maybe some other opportunities that we might suggest either to DSC or the Independent Science Board or certainly to the Conservancy, which some of us, wear different hats as it relates to those bodies. But I just think this, Eric, I want to thank you for keeping this kind of on the front burner, and I would suggest we continue to keep it on the front burner because it's not going to go away by itself, and I would suggest that from what I heard this evening, that's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And in that vein, I would think this commission wanted to keep pretty close tabs on progress or lack thereof, and whatever role we can play, certainly individually and collectively, we ought to continue to sustain, I think, some effort and some attention to this.
Thanks, Don.
And Mr. Chair, if I could mention one thing, Assemblyman Frazier's office is soliciting ideas. Assemblyman Frazier carried the last piece of legislation that really made an advance in this area that reclassified marine debris and has really been a benefit to the removal of some of these problem vessels. They're looking at additional legislation in this area, and this is certainly something the Commission could weigh in on. Nothing is defined yet, and perhaps we can have an update on that at one of the early meetings in 2018 about what the legislative approach is that they're proposing.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Don kind of stole my thunder there, but I really appreciate Eric bringing this in front of the commission, and I think it's a very important issue. I know the State Lands Commission, as managers of the public trust and sovereign lands, 4.5 million acres statewide, this is a big issue for us. We don't have anything devoted to it, no funds to do that. Peter does what he can to be as creative as possible in creating partnerships. Cal Recycle was mentioned. I know they've been a big partner of ours as well in different things. You mentioned Assemblymember Frazier. I know Commissioner Villegas has been involved working with Peter on a vessel that was right here that I'm sure Mitch has dealt with as well, right under the Pioneer Bridge there. And so there's just, it's a constant uphill battle, as you can see, and we really need some champions in all the counties to come together and really put the resources together. And I hope this is just the beginning of this kind of discussion. I hope it's not the end for this commission, and that we can continue to bring this. But I really appreciate having that forum.
Every June when we set our budgets, I always remind myself that the budgeting process is really about setting priorities. And if this becomes a priority for the state, the money's there. We'll find it. We just need to get this in front of those that can make those decisions. So we ought to be working collectively on it, and the 5 Delta counties ought to make that an issue, a priority. Okay. Well, again, thank you. Any other comments from commission members? No other audience members?
I just wanted to add that...
Why don't you come to the mic, please?
I say in our Abandoned and Derelict Vessel meetings that, whatever I can do to help you guys to help us, sincerely. If you want my business card, however I can answer any questions, get you to the right person, because I'm not necessarily it every time, but, whatever I can do.
Yeah, I think Mitch and Peter are on the front lines, and they're completely outmanned. They're the finger in the dike people, and they're looking for any help and any creative ideas and any support.
Yeah, well, the other group that's very deeply involved with this are law enforcement at the county level, and I had hoped to have a representative from one of the sheriff's department, and it just didn't come together. But they're instrumental in this, and they're really on the front lines of the removal effort as well. And so it's a team approach. The commission, I think, played a small part by helping make this research possible and documenting the extent of the problem, and we'll continue to look for those opportunities too. insert ourselves into this issue. We're obviously not going to be out there removing the vessels, but if we can help make resources available or, you know, document the extent of the problem so that we understand it's manageable and can come up with the resources to tackle it, we'll do that.
Okay. Any announcements? Then we're going to adjourn January 18th.
January 18th in the city of Pittsburgh, and with thanks to Commissioner Benalis for helping us get the city of Pittsburgh council chambers.
Very good.
Thank you.